Hi, everyone. Welcome and good morning, Nir.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us from Singapore.
Yes, that's why it's morning here. So I'm in the future. I guess most of you are still in Monday. I'm already in Tuesday, and let me tell you, Tuesday's beautiful. It's going to be a
Is
great
it?
day. Yeah, the
Well, it
future
must
is
be
great.
beautiful because you're done with Monday, which is the best.
That's true.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's how Nir gets to know so many things. He just lives in the future and then tells us about it.
Exactly. Time
I'm
travel.
sure I was the first person to make this joke. Well, welcome everyone. Super excited to talk to Nir today. Start thinking of what questions you might want to ask. The team will share a link so that you can do so. But first, a really quick introduction, although I'm sure many people already know. Nir Eyal is the best-selling author of Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and also Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And, I think Hooked might be a slightly more well-known book in some markets, although it appears that in Brazil, Indistractable got there first. But I'm excited to talk about both. Nir, I was just reading your tweets recently, and you talked about how Indistractable is based on thousands of pages of psychological studies. So I'm excited to dig in there as well. He has taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He's published pieces in the Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, TechCrunch, and Psychology Today. He also blogs at nirandfar.com. If you want to keep up, you should subscribe to his free weekly newsletter. And also, he's an active investor. Before you go pitching Nir, I'm sure he's very selective. He picks particularly habit-forming technologies, and some of the startups he's invested in include some that we may have heard of, like Eventbrite, ProductHunt, Kahoot, and many others. I'm lucky to know Nir from my days at Duolingo, talking about gamification, Hooked, and what keeps people coming back. And so it's such a pleasure to have you here today, Nir, and to answer all of our questions about how to engage our users.
Thank you so much, Gina. It's a pleasure. I couldn't think of a better person to have this conversation with, so thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's get started. I have some questions first because, I might as well, but maybe just inspiring everyone to think of their questions. My first one is just very basic. So I'm assuming a lot of people have read the book, maybe some haven't, but just going back to basics, what is a habit-forming product and why does forming habits matter? Why did you decide to write about it?
Yeah, so I thought I was going to start another business. I started two tech companies. One was in solar. The next one was in the gaming and advertising space. And I thought I was going to start another company. And I had this theory that as the screen interface shrank, right? So as we went from desktop screens to laptop screens to mobile screens and now to wearable screens like the Apple Watch, and now actually even more recently when we think about the Amazon Alexa, the screen has disappeared, right? When we talk to these auditory devices. So I had a theory that as the screen shrank, that habits would become more important. Why? Because there's just less real estate. There's just less surface area to send people all these external triggers. There's just less room to tell people what to do with visual interfaces. So that would mean that we would have to rely on habits. Why? Because if you're not on someone's home screen today, if you're not on that first page, if you're like on page number 6 on their screen, if they don't have a habit, you might as well not even exist. So I really wanted to build my next business around some kind of consumer habit, but I didn't know how to build habits. And so I started asking all my former colleagues and customers and doing a lot of research. And I looked for a book on how to build habit-forming products, and I couldn't find one. And so I just started researching this field, spent a lot of time at the Stanford library and speaking with experts in this space. And then I just slowly started blogging about it on my blog, nirandfar.com. Kind of collecting what I was learning and sharing it with the world. And then my blog kind of grew. And then I got a call from a former professor of mine at Stanford that said, hey, I really like your model. What if we teach a class together? And so that led into a lectureship role at Stanford, the GSB, and then later at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design. And out of that, from years of research and then combining my practical experience, having been in the gaming and advertising space, these are two industries that rely on changing human behavior. I came up with this model, this hook model, which is all about how to get users to interact with your product, not because they feel like they have to, but because they want to. And the idea, the big picture here is, what if we could steal the secrets of the Silicon Valley tech giants? What if we could make products as engaging as WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram and Slack and Snapchat? What if we could make products that were that sticky, but to help people not just be entertained, but to help them live better lives? So what if we could use, to make a product that was as habit forming to help people learn a new language, like our experience with Duolingo, right? To make that into a habit. What if we could make people exercise out of a habit? What if we could help people save money out of a habit? So all these things, we can get people hooked to healthy behaviors by using the same basic psychology that we see in all these Silicon Valley tech giants. So that's what Hooked is all about. I didn't write it for the big guys. I wrote it for you all. I wrote it for people who are building the kind of products that can improve people's lives if people would just remember to use the product itself. So that's what Hooked is for.
That's awesome. And at Duolingo, we specifically chose to go after DAUs as our main metric, and we can talk about that later if someone doesn't understand much about growth metrics, but daily active users, because we wanted using Duolingo to be like brushing your teeth, and we wanted to make it so that like you brush your teeth, you use Duolingo, you don't even think about it. And I love that you use the word healthy. We don't need to get into it profoundly because I could, but there's so much literature out there, and I know that you've been very loud and proud about this, but a lot of literature about games that are trying to get people addicted to things, do them over and over, like that's bad. But you're talking about healthy behaviors and how to get someone to do that repeatedly without having to think about it.
Right. And it is worth mentioning because look, any form of design is a form of manipulation. Let's face it, whether it's interaction design, whether it's interior design, graphic design, all design is a form of manipulation. When you are changing someone's behaviors or emotions to meet your ends, especially business ends, that's a form of manipulation. But remember, there are two kinds of manipulation. There's what we call persuasion, which is helping people do things they themselves want to do, learn a new language, exercise, save money, be more productive at work, connect with loved ones. These are things that people want to do, but for lack of good product design, they don't do. So that's very ethical. In fact, I think if you have the talent and the skill to build those kind of products, it's unethical not to use behavioral design to help people do these kind of things. Because again, it's things people themselves want to do, but the products themselves don't let them do them. So that's persuasion, helping people do things they want to do. The unethical type of manipulation is called coercion. Coercion is when we get people to do things they did not want to do, things that they regret. That's unethical. We never want to do that. Not only is it unethical, it's bad for business, right? Because you can trick somebody once, but after you trick them once and they regret what they did, guess what? They're going to never use your product again. And they're going to tell all their friends not to use your product either. So tricking people with coercive, black hat type tactics doesn't work in the long term. It's not only unethical, it's bad for business. So what this is about, it's not about addicting people. It's about habituating people. So addictions are always bad. An addiction by definition is a persistent compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that harms the user. We do not want to addict people. What we want to do is to habituate them, because a habit is simply a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. And already about half of your behaviors today are done out of habit. So if we can use technology to facilitate healthy habits, well, that's a wonderful thing, right? Because now we're helping persuade people to do things that they themselves want to do.
I couldn't agree more, Nir. And thinking about it, practically speaking, for if you are a early stage, tech startup or founder, just hypothetically, I think it's interesting to think about what that means too. And my question to you is, how do I, if I have a startup, if I have an app, if I have a website, whatever it is, think about whether it's appropriate to think about habit forming behaviors and encouraging them in that app. So for example, it's great to help people learn a language by getting them to go back and do it every single day. But then if you're a bank and you're trying to get people to come back every day because it's good for your metrics and maybe for, you think it might be good for your business, you might be actually getting people to become obsessed about, the money in their account in a way that's actually not healthy, but maybe also doesn't work because it's just not the kind of thing that people would do. They wouldn't go to the bank every day. So how do you think about, based on, what industry you're in or what product you're building, whether this habit forming model might apply or not?
Yeah. So I will say that for the vast majority of companies I've ever worked with or I've talked to or I've seen, almost nobody's problem is that people use the product too much. right? We think about, oh, it's unethical to addict people. We want to make sure they don't overuse. And yes, there are some industries, video games, perhaps gambling. Maybe you could argue social media to some extent, that they're entertainment, they're time wasters. But, everybody else is really not struggling with the fact that people overuse the product. Really what they're doing is they're struggling with the fact that they built wonderful products that could truly help people if they used it. And so that's by and large, nobody's getting addicted to enterprise SaaS software, right? Like that's not happening. So for the vast majority of people, that's not the problem. If anyone who's built product knows it's really hard to change consumer behavior. But what we can do is on the margins, we can say, okay, if we have a product that we know people want to use, you have to fundamentally deliver value. Like everything I teach in Hooked, it's not mind control. It's not, people's brains on like puppets strings. That's not how it works. It's still pretty hard to change consumer behavior. Look, if it was easy, we would all know 16 languages and we would all be in perfect shape and we would all have, big bank accounts because if products could change our behavior so easily, we would all already be at our goals. But we know it's tricky, it's tough. And so what Hook does is essentially help the kind of products that need repeat behavior. So you asked what type of company would use this. It's not, the line of demarcation is not enterprise or consumer web. The line of demarcation is frequent or infrequent. Mm-hmm. So if you have the kind of product that is not used frequently, and the cutoff point is about a week's time or less, that it's very difficult to change a consumer behavior if that key habit does not occur within a week's time or less. So many products are just not used repeatedly. For example, take cybersecurity software. Okay, cyber software, you don't use it every day. You only use it if something terrible happens and then you get some kind of alert. Take insurance, right? Car insurance or home insurance. You don't use car insurance every day. You buy it and God forbid something terrible happens, then you might need it, but you don't use it every day. So those type of products are what we call are sales-led products. You get the product bought, right? Either at the C-suite or at an individual level, you get it bought, it's sales driven, and then the customer just uses it. You just hope that they keep they keep renewing. As opposed to what we see today with more tech products, they're not sales led, they're product led, where the product itself is what gets users to come back. And so those type of products, when you think about enterprise software, when you think about SaaS products, when you think about fintech, health tech, ed tech, all of these products, if the user doesn't engage, if they don't use the product, they churn, right? And they'll stop interacting and eventually they'll stop paying. So it's those type of products that need to build a habit. So it's not that every product needs to be habit forming. It's that every product that needs to be habit forming needs to use the Hook model.
Got it. And Nir, what are some examples of tactics that you've seen time and time again work? If I'm, let's say, I'm Nir, I haven't seen you in forever. I'm thinking of building an app. Actually, we just got started and it helps people, whatever, find the right kind of flowers to buy on a weekly basis based on the weather and whatnot.
Yeah.
I know that it depends a lot on the product and it depends a lot on the industry. It depends a lot on the consumer. But like, what are some things that you've seen startups, apps, whatever, do time and time again that you think, okay, here are some things that just generally are worth trying out if you're thinking about habits?
Yeah. So tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it. So there's lots and lots and lots of little tactics, but what I wanted to give people is a model, is a strategy that you can very quickly draw up on the whiteboard in the center of your office and have everybody understand so that you can build towards that hook. And so here's what a hook is. A hook is an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Okay, so frequency is the number one criteria. So if you say, yep, this is the kind of product that should be used at least once a week, of course, more frequent is better, but at least once a week, what you want to do is make sure that you have the 4 steps of the hooked model embedded into your user experience. So step number 1 is the trigger phase. Now, there are 2 kinds of triggers. We have what we call external triggers. These are the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that gives us a call to action, that tells us what to do next. Those are external triggers. Now, we'll get back to the other kind of trigger in just a minute. The next step of the hook model is the action phase, defined as the simplest behavior the user can do to get relief from psychological discomfort. The very simplest thing they can do. So let's take Duolingo just because it's top of mind now. So the external triggers would be a notification from the app. The action is to open the app. That's it. Just open the app. And then the next step, the variable reward phase, is what activity is presented to you, right? What challenge? Now, the most important part of the hook model, the engine of the hook model, is this variable reward. So we're kind of taught in the product design community, just give people what they want, right? Just, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. And I'm here to tell you that's not exactly right, that you also need some kind of variability. You need some kind of what's called an intermittent reinforcement. So this comes out of the classic work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. Skinner had these pigeons he put in a little box, and he would let these pigeons peck at a disc to receive a little food pellet. And at first, he could train these pigeons to peck at the food pellet every time they wanted this reward. By the way, the pigeons had to be hungry, right? There had to be that inherent need, just like with our customers and users. We can't make them want things. They have to have that inherent need, that we have to scratch their itch. But as long as the pigeons were hungry, they would peck at the disc and they would get a little food pellet. Great. That's called operant conditioning. No big deal. One day, Skinner ran out of these food pellets. He didn't have enough of them. So he couldn't afford to give it to them every time. He could only afford to give it to them once in a while. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc and no reward would come out. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So this is very important. In all sorts of products that we find habit forming, online, offline, enterprise, consumer web, doesn't matter, you always see this element of mystery, this element of the unknown, this variability. Okay, it's what makes slot machines engaging. It's also what makes scrolling a feed so captivating. So that variability is very, very important. Then finally, the last step of the hook model, and probably the most overlooked, is called the investment phase. And this is really important. The investment is where the user puts something into the product to make it better and better with use. So in Duolingo, after I do the activity, I accrue a skill set, right? That's kept track for me, right? That shows me, hey, you're getting better and better. And it changes based on my previous behavior. So my lesson that's to come is based on what I was able to do in the previous lesson. So the product keeps getting better the more I use it. If you think about social media, right? The algorithms look at what you have done in the past to give you new recommendations in the future. That's part of why social media is so engaging, so habit forming. So that investment phase needs to make the product better and better the more it is used, so that through successive cycles, through this hook model, trigger, action, reward, investment, eventually you don't need external triggers at all. Remember, we talked about those external triggers, those pings, dings, and rings. Through successive cycles, when a habit is formed, the user begins to associate the product's use not with the external trigger, but with an internal trigger. The internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state, okay? Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety, stress, any uncomfortable sensation that when I experience, I look to a product's use to help me with that problem. And look, every product you use, every product you buy, you interact with, fundamentally you are using for one psychological reason. And that is to modulate your mood, to feel something different. So that's why it's imperative, if you're going to build a habit forming product, the first question you need to ask is, what is the customer's internal trigger? What is that psychological itch that the use of our product will satiate? And this is, by the way, why I love what I do, right? We are solving people's problems. We are solving their pain points. So you have to be able to articulate that, not just on a functional level, not just, oh, our product can do X, Y, Z features, but on a psychological level. What is that uncomfortable sensation that when they feel, we are the product that scratches that itch? So my best piece of advice to a product that's brand new, right? The way the hook model is useful is at two stages. Either very, very early days when you haven't built anything and now you're trying to figure out, if we need people to come back on their own, how do we build a habit? So that's where you would ask yourself these 5 fundamental questions of, number one, what's the internal trigger? What's the external trigger? What is the action? How can it be made more simple? Then the variable reward, is the variable reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, the investment phase, what's the bit of work done to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? And you can ask yourself those 5 fundamental questions in the very, very early days Or the second place where it's really useful is after you have a product in market. Okay, people are using it, but they're not building the kind of habit you would have expected. They're not coming back as frequently as you would have thought, or maybe a very small percentage of your user base is coming back, but most people are churning out. Then you would take out the hook model again and say, okay, do we have the right internal trigger? Do we have the right external trigger? Is the action easy enough? Do we have the right rewards? And finally, are we asking for the right investment so that you can diagnose, right? You can act like a doctor and say, okay, I think I understand the illness, so that you can treat it. You can come up with all these hypotheses to try and improve the product by making sure you have a solid hook.
Awesome. And I think it's brilliant. We use elements of this model a lot at Duolingo, by basically coming up with what are these different elements, and how can we apply them to Duolingo. I love that you gave them a name and you made sense of all of this in a really easy way, so that if I'm a new founder, I have a framework from which to work. What we did at Duolingo is we applied it at the growth phase. As you said, we already had a lot of users coming back, but we needed to improve that significantly every week, because on the startup life, you need to improve significantly all the time, otherwise you die. And so what we did is we looked at games, because games are the highest retention category in the App Store. They're great at keeping people around and keeping people just like the dings, like you said, and the rings and the notifications that keep you coming back. And we started noticing that every single game you play has things like variable reward. It's like these like, woo, if I click this button, what's going to happen this time? And then thinking like, okay, well, at Duolingo, we have these very predictable lessons. And every time you complete a lesson, this happens. How would we bring variable rewards? And then how do we test that to find out if that's an idea that actually works, or what are other ideas that would produce that feeling, as you said? And so my next question, also on the practical front, Nir, is how would you recommend we identify and test the triggers that form a habit in your product, like in a different product?
Yeah. So there are two kinds of triggers. We have the external triggers and the internal triggers. The internal triggers are the more important from a habit forming perspective. Why? Because you can always buy the external triggers, right? If you can always buy growth. This is why we always need to prioritize engagement over growth, because growth you can always buy. You go buy Facebook ads, you go buy Google ads, you can buy growth. You can get people to come to try your product out. What you can't buy is engagement. Engagement has to be designed into the product itself, which is why we always have to prioritize engagement before growth, because if you prioritize growth over engagement, you're going to have what's called a leaky bucket business. And I've seen way too many of these in my career. You know, these companies that look like they're growing like crazy, but then of course, when they turn off the growth spigot, when they stop spending money on user acquisition, guess what? Nobody sticks around. It's a leaky bucket. So that's why growth without retention is a huge waste of money. So the most important internal trigger is that internal trigger, because that's what you're ultimately going to attach the product's use to. The goal of a habit forming product is to no longer require those external triggers. You don't need those pings and dings. You don't need people to have those spammy messages and expensive marketing messages. People use the product on their own because they want to, because it's out of habit. So with Duolingo, maybe it's something that, I'm on the bus and I'm kind of bored. So instead of checking Facebook, or instead of, doing something else, I get pleasure. I get, it scratches my itch of boredom to take a quick lesson with Duolingo. That would be a great example of attaching to an internal trigger, so that even when you don't send them a ping, ding, or ring, they use it on their own. That's when we really know we formed a habit. So identifying what is that emotional itch is incredibly important. And what you want to do, you want to look at their existing behaviors. So habits usually have some kind of existing behavior that you're going to display. So when I hear a company and I ask them, I ask a startup, hey, how do users currently solve this problem? And if they tell me, oh, Nir, you don't understand, this is blue ocean, nobody's solving this problem today, they think it's a good thing. But typically I think it's a bad thing, because if you can't identify how the user currently solves the problem, what does that mean? It means it's probably not a problem. So you always want to find where that existing behavior is occurring. I don't care if the solution is awful. Actually, I want the solution to be terrible. If you're going to replace that solution, it can be Scotch tape and bubble gum. It can be, Excel spreadsheets stitched together through some terrible API. That's good, actually. We want to see that it's hard to do what the user is trying to do, but we always want to find where that existing behavior is happening, because if it's not a current problem, it's probably not a problem at all. And so that's a much bigger risk. So that's how we identify the internal trigger, is to look for that emotional state. Another thing you can do is called the 5 whys technique, where if you're trying to get to what that internal trigger is, start with just asking yourself why, right? Why would the user want to do this behavior? Oh, okay. Let's take email, for example. Why would the user want to send email? Well, the user needs to communicate with her colleagues. Okay, but why? But why? But why? But why? Until you get to a feeling, a negative emotion. It's got to be an uncomfortable emotional state. That way, when you start with an emotion as opposed to a feature, your aperture opens way up, right? The problem that I see so many times with startups is that they already know the solution, but they don't know the problem. That happens all the time because they're so stuck on, oh, this is how we're going to solve this, that they don't back up and let themselves be truly creative and come up with a real solution by asking, okay, but what's the deeper need? What's the psychological need? Is it anxiety, stress, uncertainty, loneliness? That's the kind of base level uncomfortable sensation that we can really design world-changing products for, okay? So that's how to come up with the internal triggers. External triggers, how do we come up with good external triggers? Well, the problem with external triggers is that by and large, we abuse them. We send users too many pings, dings, and rings, and we annoy the hell out of them. And that's very dangerous because if we do that, users will uninstall us, right? They'll just quit your app altogether, or they'll silence notifications. And now it's become so easy to do so on the new iOS and the new Android platforms. You can, silence notifications so easily. And then that's it. Once the user does that one time, you're never going to get them to turn it back on. So you have to be very, very careful. So what's the difference between an external trigger that feels like spam and one that feels like magic? What's the difference? The difference is one word, and that one word is context. Okay, context. Let me give you a great story to illustrate the point. So I was on a long haul flight recently, and I was sitting in the aisle seat, and across from me was this guy who was clearly asleep. Okay, he had his blanket up, he had a big pillow, he was clearly passed out on the plane. And the flight attendant comes down the aisle and she looks at him and she says, "Sir." And he doesn't answer because clearly he's sleeping. So she says it again. She says it louder. She says, "Sir." And he's still, totally passed out. And now people are starting to notice what's going on here. So she says it a third time. She says, "Sir." And he wakes up. He said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what is it? What is it?" She says, "Sir, what would you like to drink?" And we think this is ridiculous, right? It's funny, right? Why would you do that to somebody? And we think, oh my gosh, that's so rude. How could the flight attendant do this? And yet we do this to our users all the time. We send them notifications and emails and messages and pings and dings on our schedule, not on their schedule. Did that guy want a drink? Yes, he wanted a drink, but he wants the drink when he's thirsty, not when he's sleeping, which is why if we are going to send external triggers, we need to make sure that we closely couple the external trigger with the internal trigger. So the closer together you can send that message, that notification, the minute the user feels that discomfort, which is why it's so important to know what discomfort you're looking for. So the moment I feel bored, lonely, tired, stressed, anxious, that's when you want to send me this external trigger. And the more closely together you can couple them, the more likely you are to get a response, and the more likely the user is to feel like, wow, this product really knows me. It's so useful, so that you can send them through the hook cycle enough times so that eventually you don't need to send them any more external triggers. They will trigger themselves.
And at Duolingo, what we did with that was we decided to send notifications 23.5 hours before after someone signed up every day, because how do you find out what is the time that they're going to be hungry, or they're going to want to learn a language because they're bored, or because they're available and they actually have the free time? And so especially if they're all over the world, they have different routines. Some people have kids, some people don't, etc. So we just decided, you know what? If they signed up at this time, it's probably at a time that they were sitting there thinking like, oh, I really wish I could learn a language, or I really wish I had something productive to do with my time that wasn't Instagram right now, or whatever. But it was a time that they were idle. And so we thought if we could send them a notification right before that time every day, we might actually see an increase in usage. And that was the case, which is explained by what you just said.
Totally. And that's a great place to start, right? Very logical, great place to start. Today, there's so many other things we can do as well, right? If we ask people for calendar access, we can see when there might be opportunities for them so we won't bother them in the middle of a meeting. Maybe we'll bother them during their downtime when they might appreciate this. We can ask them when they would most likely to interact with us again, right? As part of the investment phase, something small, a small bit of work that can help design preferences for the future. Today, there's a geolocation. There's all kinds of things we could do that we couldn't do a few years ago that can help give us clues as to when the user would most likely feel the need to use our product.
That's awesome. This is gold, Nir. Thank you so much. And for the people who have joined us after the beginning, it's just we're here talking to Nir Eyal. He's a best-selling author of Hooked and Indistractable, which we haven't talked about yet. And this is Latitude Night. If it's your first time joining, this is a monthly space for all founders, especially based in Latin America or interested in Latin America, with actionable insights for early stage aspiring founders, to learn from the best of the best that are out there. And so it's open to everyone, and you're welcome to join us every month. And then if you want more of this, you can always sign up for Latitude. We can talk about that later as well. Nir, I think maybe one last question before we jump into the audience questions, because we're just over the halfway mark here. Tell us about Indistractable and what took you from Hooked to Indistractable. I think it's obviously a really cool combination. First, looking into what keeps people super engaged to something, and then trying to understand what takes away our attention from the things that we really care about, which is a huge problem today and a huge problem for founders. Tell us about sort of that transition and a little bit about what Indistractable is about, so that people can also ask questions.
Sure. So I write books for problems that I myself have. So with Hooked, when I couldn't find a book on how to build habit-forming products, I decided to research and write it for 5 years to get to the bottom of how to do it. When after a few years after writing Hooked, I had a new problem that now, I started getting busier and busier, and I had more requests on my time, and it was getting increasingly difficult as an entrepreneur to stay focused on what really matters. And there was one instance that really made me reconsider my relationship with my time and attention. I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we had some daddy-daughter time, just some quality time together. And I remember we had this book of activities that dads and daughters could do together. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this question: if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember that question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, for whatever reason, I just had to do this one quick thing on my phone. And by the time I looked up from my device, she was gone, because she'd gotten a very clear message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And so she walked out of the room to play with some toy outside. And if I'm honest with you, Gina, it wasn't just with my daughter. It would happen when I would say, oh, today I'm definitely going to exercise, but I didn't. Oh, I'm going to start eating right. Not so much. Today, I'm definitely going to work on that big project, and I'm not going to get distracted. And yet somehow I would do everything but that big thing I said I was going to do. And so if you ask me today what superpower I think is most important, I think the skill of the century will be the power to do what you say you're going to do. The power to be indistractable is the power to control your attention and to ultimately choose your life. That there is no area of your life that is not influenced by your ability to control your attention, whether it's your physical health, your mental health, your relationships, your work output. Everything requires you to be able to control your attention. And so I found I didn't have that power. And so I wanted to do some research into how do you get it? And so, I read every book I could find on the topic, and a lot of them basically said the same thing. Well, it's all social media's fault. Stop using technology, stop checking email. And then when you check who wrote the book, oh, it's some professor who has tenure. Great. Like, I can't stop using email. I can't stop using social media. My business depends on it. I'm going to get fired. I'm not going to have a career if I don't use these technologies. And so I really wanted to understand, is it really the technologies that are causing these problems of distraction, or is there some deeper reason for it? And so what I learned over the 5 years writing this book was that distraction has always been with us, that in fact, Plato and Aristotle talked about the problem of akrasia in the Greek, the tendency to do things against our better interest. And it turns out if they were talking about it 2,500 years ago, it can't be caused by our technology. Now, what has happened is that if you are looking for distraction, it's easier than ever today to find. And so if you don't protect yourself, if you don't know how to stay focused on what's important, if you don't teach your kids how to make sure to stay focused on what's important, then you're in trouble. So the good news is that we can become indistractable, and that's what Indistractable is all about. So I took my experience understanding the psychology of how we get hooked to products to explain how we can disconnect from things that don't serve us. Now, of course, it's not the same products, right? We would want to disconnect and get unhooked from Facebook or WhatsApp or Instagram, but we might want to get hooked to an exercise app or a language learning app or, a personal finance app. That could be very good. So we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have both. So the idea is that we want to help people get hooked to healthy habits, and we want to break those bad habits. So that's the two books in summary.
Amazing. Random tip that nobody asked for. I started doing yoga with Adrian in 2020. And to me, it's like that. I wanted to do yoga every day, but I knew I wasn't going to do it. And so you sign up to a thing that's like 30 days of yoga. No one will do anything if you don't complete it. But suddenly like the 30 days makes you focus anyway. But that's awesome. I think we can all relate to the problems that you talked about with regards to not only your daughter. I hope she has forgiven you by now, but also exercising and eating right. That's something that I face every day myself, and I'm sure everyone here can relate to as founders. And so I think with that, we can move over to questions asked by everyone who's here. And I wanted to say thank you to everyone here. We are actually in the middle of a huge holiday in Brazil and also of a holiday in the US. And so this is a pretty fantastic turnout, Nir, unsurprisingly, for this date. So I'll go look at the questions that are on the Slido link provided by the team. If you put your name down, I'll call you up. And if you feel comfortable, you can step up and ask your questions so that we don't have to keep hearing my voice all the time. But the first question is anonymous, which is, how do you create habit in a B2B segment in which there are different user personas within the company?
Yeah, very common problem where the buyer may not necessarily be the user. Now, this used to be, it still exists, but it used to be more of a problem than it is today. It used to be, you have to go to the top person in management, right? You go to the chief procurement officer or something, and you have to convince them to use the product. It used to be, everything used to be sales driven versus product led. And the problem was, of course, that person at the tippy top would say, hey, everybody, I bought this software. Now you're all going to use it. Those days are coming to an end. I mean, I literally get emails every week from some company that tells me, hey, people are quitting because of how bad our internal software is, right? Or we were using this vendor and people refuse to use their product. They're threatening to leave my company because we have this kind of labor market where talent can say, hey, you're making my life miserable with this terrible software. I don't want to work here because it's too onerous. And so what we've seen is that instead of top-down sales, we've seen more bottom-up. So if you think about Salesforce or GitHub or Stack Overflow or just Slack is a great example. The frontline workers adopted this enterprise software first, and then they said to the boss, hey boss, we're all using this software. Can you go ahead and pay the bill? Because we want to keep using it. That is a much stickier sales model. That's a product-led model where building the habit, right? Slack is a perfect example. When people in the organization started using Slack, of course, it was free at first until they built a habit, until it became indispensable. And then they said, okay, now you have to start paying for it. After you had whatever it was, 3 connections or 3 APIs, then they sent the bill to the boss and said, boss, go pay it. That's what we're seeing much more now. It's called the consumerization of IT. And so that's a trend that will only continue. Now, how do you build for that? The more important thing to build for, I think, is for the end user, right? So whatever customer you're serving in the enterprise, build that hook first, validate that hook first. And you can validate that through freemium. You can validate that all kinds of ways to see, hey, if we were to sell inside the enterprise, would people actually keep using the product? And then once you know that, once you have some validation about the product hook is looking good, then you can go to the stakeholder that you just have to get their approval to get them to sign off on using it. So that bottom up model where you can get people to use it, get hooked to using it, and then send the boss the bill tends to be much more effective because then you've already proven your value. It's not, oh, promise us people will love, we promise you people will love it. No, look, people are already using it. It's already indispensable. So the people at the company become your advocates.
Superhuman has done a great job of that. Like they actually just contacted Latitude and we're like, hey, like 3 people there are using, our product. Do you want to do something bigger? I think Slack is also a great example. I remember at Duolingo when people were like, let's use Slack. And we were all like, we are already using, what was it called? Whatever the predecessor was. And they were like, but they're cool emojis here. And suddenly it became inevitable. But I love that, Nir, because I think we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who still think from a sales-led perspective, which is like, how do I sell this product to the decision maker at this company, and not how do I actually solve the problem of the people in the company that are going to use or not use this product. And so once you make that sale, that's great, but then if you don't actually cultivate the retention, then
and sometimes you have to do that, right? If there's a product that is not used frequently, like cybersecurity software, not everybody in the organization is going to use it every day. It's something that some stakeholder, you have to going to get them buy. The problem, of course, is that the sales cycles can be crazy long, right? And the amount of time it takes for you to get feedback on, is this product any good, is ridiculous, right? Whereas if it's a product like, Superhuman or Slack, people are using it every day. So they had all kinds of feedback around what they should improve to make the product stickier and stickier with use. It's to the point where people said, oh, we can't live without it. Like we have to keep using this.
For sure. Thank you, Nir. The next question is from David. David, if you're around, do you want to step up and ask your question? Okay, then I will ask David's question for him. It was voted 10 times. What type of investigation would you recommend to implement internal hooks if our customers use our product in a daily basis for a B2B SaaS?
Sorry, I didn't make it, but thank you for asking.
David, hi. You can rephrase your question. I'm sorry, I didn't wait long enough.
And thank you. Sorry about that, Gina. So Nir, the question is related to how can we, as an SMB in Latam, we can get hooked our customers that they already use our service on a daily basis, right? So how can we start those testing of the customers that use our CRM, which is like a WhatsApp connected to a CRM that gives powers for our customers so they can sell through WhatsApp? How can we start that?
So you said they are already using the product?
Yes, they use it in a daily basis. Like it's super sticky, our product, because they sell through WhatsApp, which is regular in LATAM, right? And the thing is that we want to understand how to get those internal triggers, as you said in your book. So that's the question.
So if they're already using it every day, it sounds like you already have the internal triggers. If it's a SMB selling product on through WhatsApp, the internal trigger is uncertainty, right? Who's waiting for me? What do my customers want? How do I know? I have to check. So it sounds like you've already got your internal trigger. Maybe you're thinking of the investment that maybe you're missing.
Probably yes. What we don't know is we have been making, like, in general, this by feeling. So probably it's just how to get that into like actual triggers that we can test and just improve, so we can get those notifications such as Duolingo did in the past, right? Or is doing it right now.
What percentage of your users? Well, how many users do you have currently interacting or installed? I don't know.
So
it's on what
we have around 1,100 customers, and if we multiply by 5, it would be an amount of users that we have. So each company has around 5 to 6 users, which are salesmen using our platform, and they just communicate with their customers in regular basis.
Beautiful. And what percentage of that 5,000 or so users are using it 5 days a week?
I can guess. I don't have the number, but I can. That's actually my question. Like, yes, how can we get to those numbers? But I guess around 4,000.
Around 4,000. Oh, that's fantastic. So that's very, very high. So what I'm demonstrating here, by the way, is what I think is the most important metric. The most important metric is the percentage of habituated users. So what percentage of your user base? I'm not a big fan of like DAU over MAU. I think those type of metrics are bad for a few different reasons, mostly because they're polluted with new users. But if you look at the percentage of habituated users, meaning what percentage of your users use it with the level of frequency that would indicate they have a habit. So in David's case, it's a product for SMBs. They're probably, if they're habituated, it would be reasonable to assume that you're going to use it 5 days a week, right? Maybe more, but let's say 5 days a week. That would indicate you're probably habituated to the product. You're not going to use some other solution. So what I would do is to say, okay, what percentage of my user base is currently habituated? In David's case, it's excellent, right? It sounds like 4 out of 5 customers are already using it 5 days a week. That's fantastic. And then what I would do is I would come up with hypotheses to test to improve the product based on the hook model. So how can we make the action easier? How can we make the variable reward more rewarding and yet leave some bit of mystery? How can we improve the product with use through the investment phase? Come up with a list of hypotheses and then start testing them, right? Start testing them based on impact and ease, which ones fit that upper right quadrant of high impact and easiest to develop. And then what you're going to do is to look at per cohort after you made the change, did that percentage of habituated users go up or did it go down? Okay, so if you say, okay, wow, we have 20%, 30% of our users using it every day before this feature, and now that number went up, great. If it went down, well, then yank out that feature. That didn't make the product more sticky. So there isn't a, I don't have enough exposure to your product. I haven't even seen it. So I can't say, oh, David, you should try this. But what I can tell you is if you follow this process, if you take out the hook model and say, okay, here we have 3 hypotheses for how we can make each of the steps of the hook better, or maybe you have part of the hook that you know could improve. And then what you're going to want to do is to test it per cohort to see if the percentage of habituated users increased.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Nir. And I would say one more thing, which is what we found out at Duolingo is that sometimes the absence of something can prove how impactful it is, or actually implementing something that leads to a negative result can show how something is impactful. So, for example, we found out we knew notifications were somewhat impactful, but we only found out that it was actually really truly impactful because notifications broke one day, and then we realized nobody came back. And then I was like, oh, notifications really matter. And so I think that's something that you can watch for. Like if something doesn't work, or if you test something, it actually has a really negative result, that means that moment is an opportunity to build a hook, because it's a moment that matters to that user for some reason or another. Great. And then also, for those of you who are not yet part of the Latitude community, check out the link that Lucia posted in the chat and join us to have amazing conversations like these with people who are almost as amazing as Nir throughout the cohort. So the next question is from Aldo. And I don't know if Aldo is around. If you are, please speak up. Maybe I'll wait longer this time.
Yeah. Hey, Gina. Hey, Nir.
Hello.
My question is, how do you break like a lifetime habit to replace it with another? For example, Square broke the lifetime habit of paying with cash to paying with card.
Yeah, this is a great question, Aldo. I'm glad you asked it, because it shows you the power of building a habit. So if you have a consumer habit, that's a great place to be, right? Because it's a huge competitive advantage, right? Once you own that customer habit, you don't even consider the competition, right? How many of us Google something, but when we Google it, we don't ask ourselves, I wonder who makes a better search engine. We don't. We just Google it with little or no conscious thought. We don't even give the competition a chance. And so it's a great place to be if you own the company and the customer habit. It's a very hard place to be if you're the new startup trying to capture the customer's habit. So the good news is there are 4 ways to capture the competition's habit, 4 ways. The first way is greater velocity through the hook. If you can send people through the 4 steps of your hook model faster than the competition, that's the first way. And that typically happens with some kind of big innovation in the action phase. So when we move from some kind of interface that makes it much faster, much quicker to get relief from that emotional discomfort, that's the first way. Okay, so velocity. The second way is greater frequency. If you can be the person who sends your customer through the hook more often throughout the day, that's another great place to be, right? So if you think about why did Facebook buy Instagram? I remember when I was in Silicon Valley, the day that the deal was announced and Zuckerberg bought Instagram for $1 billion, everybody laughed. What an idiot, $1 billion for this stupid photo app. What a waste of money. And of course, today, Instagram would be worth something like $50 billion if it was separated from, maybe more now, if it was separated from Facebook. He made the deal of the century because he realized that Facebook was laptop first, right? It was desktop first, whereas Instagram was designed mobile first. And so he knew he had to capture that customer habit because people could engage with the product more frequently throughout their day when it was built mobile first. So number one is velocity. Number two is frequency. Number three is to make the reward more rewarding. And this is the approach most people take, but it's the hardest of the four. This is when a product is just so much better at scratching the user's itch, when the reward is just way better. Now, there's a study published in the Harvard Business Review that found that for a product to displace an existing habit, it can't just be better. It has to be 9 times better to escape that inertia of a habit. But it does happen every once in a while, right? Like we might see this today with, people say with GPT, if GPT is just so much better than Google search, well, wow, it could knock people off of their existing habits. Of course, Google's not stupid. They're not going to sit still. They're also going to have a similar competing feature. But that's what this whole Bing versus Google war is about. Wow, if ChatGPT is so much better, maybe people will switch. Now that's really, really hard to do. The product just has to be light years ahead, and that's very, very rare. The last way to capture the competition's customer habit is to make it easier to enter the hook in the first place. So if you think to yourself, what is the most widely used enterprise software today? The most widely used enterprise software today is Google Docs. It didn't used to be. It used to be Microsoft Office. Well, how did Microsoft Office lose out to Google Docs? Google Docs, when it first came out, did a fraction of what Microsoft Office could do, but it had a big advantage. And that advantage was that it was very easy to start using the product. Why? It was free. And there was no software no disks. Remember back in the day when we used to have to use Microsoft Word or Excel, we had to get a disk that we paid for in order to start using it. Well, then Google Docs came out and it was hosted in the cloud. It was free. So if you're a college student and you just want to write your term paper, or you're a startup founder and you just want a spreadsheet, you could instantly get into the hook in the first place, sending people down the 4 steps of trigger, action, reward, and investment. So the 4 ways to capture the competition's customer habit is velocity, frequency, make the reward more rewarding, or easier entry into the hook. It's not easy, but it has been done and it can be done.
Amazing, Nir. Thank you. Thank you so much. My competitor is a notebook, so I might have the win there.
Okay,
Great.
so I'll drop the article in as well here so everybody can read further on that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nir. Okay, so we only have 5 minutes left. So I nudged everyone in the chat. Let's check out the questions that we have here and make sure that you upvote the ones that you care about the most, because we probably will only have time for 1 or 2 more. The next question is anonymous, which is, I guess this is a funny one for me. Nir, I guess what do you think about the aha moment? And what would you say, are ways to identify that aha moment? And the reason I say it's funny is because at Duolingo, we decided the aha moment was a myth, but I know that it's a very used framework. So what are your thoughts?
So it depends what you mean by the aha moment. Generally I agree with you. I don't think that there's a one moment where people's eyes light up. I mean, sometimes it does happen, like the classic cases, Spotify, when before, you had to buffer music, it took forever to play something, but then Spotify could do a demo and push one button and, oh my God, any song you want. That was a wow moment.
Or Facebook,
I think what's
like
more
your friends
important,
are there. Yeah.
It does happen once in a while. I think GPT is definitely having that right now of like, wow, make a poem about whatever in the style of Shakespeare, and boom, it spits it out. That's pretty wow. I don't think it's enough, though, to be honest. It's not enough, that because those are the cases we remember, but if they don't have all the parts of the hook, like what I would say that aha moment or the wow moment is a variable reward. Wow, it's so surprising. It's so, I didn't expect that to happen. That's a variable reward. But if you don't have the other parts of the hook built out, it won't last for long, right? It'll be a flash in the pan. What's more important is doing what I call habit testing. Habit testing is when we identify the users who are already hooked. Okay, so maybe you have, a few thousand users and you found, wow, 10, 20, maybe 100 of my users are actually already habituated. They're using it at the level that would suggest that they have a habit. So what do? The first step is to identify. You find those users. What's special about the users that became habituated? Then you codify. You figure out what path they took to get themselves hooked, meaning what's special about those users? What did they do? The classic story is of Twitter. Twitter found that the people who were most engaged on Twitter back in the very early days, circa 2008, 2009, it was people who followed 3 friends, right? If you followed 3 people, you are much more likely to be somebody who is hooked to using Twitter. So they codified that path, and then they modified the product so that everybody walks the same habit path. So identify, codify, modify, so that today, if you were to sign up for Twitter, still to this day, guess what? You are prompted to follow 3 friends, to follow 3 people. They're famous people, typically, Oprah or Obama, I don't know, somebody famous, because they know that the more people you follow, the more likely you are to stay engaged. So that's what I would look for. I would look for what is that habit path that currently habituated users walked, and then make that same path something that everybody then walks on.
Great. Last question, Nir. And again, thank you so much for your time. I know that it's tough to answer so many questions in a row like this, and you're an inspiration. You're amazing at it. So last question is anonymous, which is, I think, very, very relevant to all the startups at Latitude who are in, early stages. And the question is, many startups struggle with customer retention in their early stages. What are some actionable tactics that they can use to keep users coming back to their product? Even if it is very early strategy-wise. Yeah.
In the very early stages.
Super early stages. Yeah. So how to think about that when you're really just trying to get started?
So you can start, it goes from more qualitative to quantitative. So in the very, very early days, that pencil sketch is very important. So sitting down and asking yourself, do we have the necessary components of the hook model before you commit any code, before you hire any designers, before you do anything? What will be the core keystone habit? The keystone habit is the thing that people come back to most frequently, and then you can build upon that other hooks. So think about Facebook, for example. The scroll, if they could get you to come back to the feed, right? Then they can show you all the other things that the product can do, events and friends and upload photos and videos. Yeah, but if we can't get you to scroll the feed, you can't do all the other stuff. And so figuring out that keystone habit is super, super important. And that can be something that's done with very low fidelity prototypes, right? Just making sure that you have those 4 steps of the hook model. And then as you see, okay, we're getting the same answers again and again in the qualitative phase, you can start actually building the product and testing out whether people respond the way you think they will.
That's great. And so many founders, I think, resort to, let's just add more, put more things in there and see if what captures people, and that doesn't quite solve it.
That's almost never the answer.
Yeah, it's
not that you shouldn't change, it's that you shouldn't necessarily just add. When you add more things, you also add complexity, you add what we call cognitive load. And I see a lot of engineer-driven companies do this, where more features, and then the user has no idea what the hell you want them to do. So It's okay if you want to change features, but change is different. Change means you add, but then you also have to subtract something. Whereas the lazy approach, and what I see most often is, well, let's just add more things that you can do, and we'll hope that somebody figures out how do you actually use the product, which is almost never the case.
And maybe that's where your 2 books coalesce, because you're adding distractions for your user and actually not enabling them to become hooked. Yeah. So anyways, thank you again, Nir. Everyone who's here, thank you for coming. Please apply to Latitude if you are a startup founder. Are we still here?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay. I just saw the screen. I was like, did we just leave? Buy Nir's books. They're amazing. And if you're a startup founder building in or for Latin America, apply to Latitude. This is the last week to apply for our next cohort. And that's it. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Nir. Have an awesome day. And I can't wait to have coffee with you in New York soon again.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.